You've seen the paintings: Peter crucified upside down, Andrew bound to an X-shaped cross, Bartholomew flayed alive in Armenia. These are the powerful stories of the apostles' deaths, the dramatic final acts of the first heroes of the Christian faith. They are tales of ultimate sacrifice that have inspired millions for nearly 2,000 years. But what if I told you that many of these dramatic accounts, the ones you see in art and hear in sermons, are not history? That they come not from the Bible or from eyewitnesses, but from medieval legends written hundreds of years after the fact. This creates a kind of historical confusion, a crisis of confidence where we might ask, if that story isn't true, what else isn't? Today, we are going to do something different. We are not just going to retell the legends, we are going to become historical detectives. We're going to investigate the real fate of the apostles by separating verifiable fact from pious fiction. We'll look at what the Bible actually says, what the earliest church fathers recorded, and where the legends came from. This isn't about weakening faith, it's about building a more resilient faith, one founded on historical truth, not just tradition. By the end of this video, you will have a clear, mature understanding of what we actually know about how the apostles died. Before we dive into each apostle, we need a toolkit. Historians don't just accept ancient documents at face value. They use a method called source criticism. To keep it simple, we're going to use a three-tier evidence system. This is the framework that will help us see the difference between solid history and later embellishment. Tier 1 is our gold standard: contemporary or near-contemporary documentation. These are sources written within about 30 to 60 years of the events. This includes the books of the New Testament itself and writings from the earliest church fathers who might have known the apostles or their immediate disciples. When multiple independent sources from this era agree, historians take it very seriously. Tier 2 is early church tradition. These are sources from the 2nd and 3rd centuries, so anywhere from 50 to over 150 years after the apostles lived. Think of writers like Tertullian or Eusebius of Caesarea, the first great church historian. They had access to traditions and documents we no longer have. Their testimony is valuable because it shows what the early church believed, but it's not eyewitness history. It's a strong indicator, but it requires caution. Tier 3 is later legendary accounts. These are sources written centuries later, often from the 3rd and 4th centuries onward, and especially popular in the Middle Ages. This includes texts often called the Apocryphal Acts, like the Acts of Thomas or the Acts of Andrew, and medieval collections like Time's The Golden Legend Asterisk. These texts are often filled with fantastical miracles and dramatic, gory details that you don't find in the earlier sources. While spiritually significant to many, they are not considered historically reliable. The critical point is this: just because a story is ancient doesn't make it true. We have to ask, when was it written? Who wrote it? And does anyone else confirm it? With that toolkit, let's begin our investigation. Let's start with the apostles for whom we have the strongest evidence. These are the cases where the historical records are clearest and the conclusions are most certain. First up is Peter, the Rock. The case for his martyrdom is the strongest we have for any of the original 12. Our Tier 1 evidence comes from the Bible itself. In the Gospel of John, chapter 21, the resurrected Jesus says to Peter, "Truly, truly I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." The author of the Gospel then adds this crucial note. This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. This was written within a few decades of Peter's death, and it's a clear, early expectation of his martyrdom. But it doesn't stop there. We have a flood of Tier 2 evidence from multiple, independent early church fathers. Clement of Rome, writing around the year 96, mentions Peter's martyrdom in the context of the persecution under the Emperor Nero. Tertullian, writing from North Africa around the year 200, states that Peter was crucified. Eusebius, the historian, confirms this tradition, stating that Peter was indeed executed in Rome. The tradition that he was crucified upside down, feeling unworthy to die in the same manner as Jesus, comes a bit later, but the core fact of his execution by crucifixion in Rome is one of the most consistent and widely attested traditions from the early church. There are no competing ancient accounts suggesting he died of old age or recanted his faith, given that the Roman historian Tacitus, a non-Christian, confirms that Nero did in fact brutally persecute Christians in Rome around the year 64. Peter's martyrdom fits the historical context perfectly. The verdict: Peter's martyrdom is as historically certain as almost any event from the 1st century. Next is the Apostle Paul. While not one of the original 12, his fate is central to the story of the early church. For Paul, our best evidence comes from the man himself. In his second letter to the Corinthians, he provides a breathtaking list of his sufferings for the faith. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea. This is a man who was clearly willing to endure anything for his convictions. The book of Acts ends with Paul under house arrest in Rome, but early Christian tradition universally picks up the story from there. Clement of Rome, writing in the 1st century, speaks of Paul's martyrdom. Eusebius later records the consistent tradition that Paul was beheaded in Rome during the same Neronian persecution as Peter. The method of death, beheading, was fitting for a Roman citizen, which Paul was, as it was considered a more humane form of execution than crucifixion. While the Bible doesn't record his death, the unanimous voice of early church tradition, combined with Paul's own testimony of his suffering, makes his execution for the faith a historical near certainty. Now for one of the original 12, whose death times is times recorded in the Bible, James, the son of Zebedee and brother of John. This case is straightforward and rests entirely on solid, Tier 1 evidence. In the book of Acts, chapter 12, verse 2, the text states plainly, "He had James, the brother of John, killed with the sword." He refers to King Herod Agrippa I, and the event is dated to around the year 44. That's it. It's short, it's not dramatic, but it's an undeniable piece of eyewitness history from the earliest Christian chronicle. It also fits the historical context, as Herod Agrippa was known for trying to placate certain Jewish leaders by persecuting the fledgling Christian movement. The verdict here is simple. James, son of Zebedee, was the first of the 12 apostles to be martyred, and it is documented in the biblical canon itself. Finally, we come to a truly extraordinary case: James, the brother of Jesus. This is a game changer, because for this James, we have something we don't have for any other apostle, a non-Christian source confirming his death. The 1st century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, in his work Times Antiquities of the Jews *, written around the year 93, describes the actions of a corrupt high priest named Ananus. Josephus writes that Ananus convened the judges of the Sanhedrin and brought before them a man named James, the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ, and certain others. He accused them of having transgressed the law and delivered them up to be stoned to death. This passage is considered authentic by the vast majority of scholars. Josephus was not a Christian. He had no motive to invent a martyr for the church. He was simply recording Jewish history, and in the process, he gave us an independent, secular verification of the execution of a key leader of the Jerusalem church. The verdict, the martyrdom of James, the brother of Jesus, is arguably the most historically secure of them all, precisely because the evidence comes from outside the circle of Christian faith. Now we move from the historically secure to the apostles, where the evidence becomes much thinner and where tradition and legend begin to fill the gaps. This is where separating fact from legend becomes crucial. Let's talk about Thomas, often called Doubting Thomas. The popular tradition is that Thomas traveled to India, established the church there, and was eventually martyred by being pierced with a spear. It's a powerful story, and it forms the foundation of the ancient St. Thomas Christian community in India. But what is the historical evidence? The problem is, all of these details come from Tier 3 sources, most notably a book called The Times Acts of Thomas *, written in the 3rd century or even later. This text is filled with legendary and fantastical elements, and no contemporary or near-contemporary source from the 1st or 2nd century mentions Thomas going to India. Secular Indian historical sources from that period are also silent. So what can we say for sure? The New Testament shows us a man who was deeply loyal and willing to die with Jesus. His famous moment of doubt ends with one of the greatest declarations of faith, "My Lord and my God." We can be certain he was a man of immense conviction. But the specific story of his mission and martyrdom in India, that remains a powerful tradition, not a historically verifiable fact. It's a Tier 3 account, a legendary embellishment on the life of a historical figure. Next is Bartholomew, who is often identified with Nathanael from the Gospel of John. Here, the problem isn't a lack of stories, but a surplus of conflicting ones. One tradition, reported by Eusebius, claims he traveled to India. Another, more popular tradition, says he went to Armenia, where he was flayed alive and then beheaded. Still other accounts place his death in different locations with different methods. When historians see multiple conflicting legends about a person's death, it's a red flag. It suggests that the historical memory of the actual event was lost, and different communities later created their own stories to claim a connection to the famous apostle. The verdict. The contradictory accounts make it impossible to know the real fate of Bartholomew. We are firmly in the realm of Tier 3 legend. Then we have the apostles, who are even more obscure, like James, son of Alphaeus, sometimes called James the Less. He is listed among the 12, but the New Testament tells us almost nothing about him. Later, traditions are also vague and contradictory. One says he was stoned by the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, but this account is often confused with the death of James, the brother of Jesus. Another tradition has him crucified in Egypt, but none of these are supported by early or independent sources. The historical bedrock is simply too thin to build any firm conclusion. The same is true for the missionary pair of Simon the Zealot and Thaddeus, also known as Jude. They are little more than names on a list in the Gospels. Later traditions, found in apocryphal works like the Times Acts of Simon and Jude *, pair them together on a mission to Persia or Beirut, where they were martyred. But again, these are very late sources, written centuries after the fact, with no corroboration. The verdict for these apostles is the same. They were historical figures chosen by Jesus, but their ultimate fates have been lost to history and replaced by Tier 3 legendary tradition. Finally, there's Matthias, the man chosen to replace Judas Iscariot. His selection is documented in the Book of Acts, making him undeniably a historical figure. But after that, he vanishes from the biblical narrative. Late church traditions claim he was martyred, with some saying he was stoned in Jerusalem, and others placing him in modern-day Georgia. The evidence is so scarce and contradictory that it's impossible to treat it as history. Matthias is a fascinating case, a man whose entry into the apostolic circle is historical, but whose exit is a complete mystery. So, having looked at the individual apostles, let's zoom out to the bigger picture. What does all of this tell us about the early church and the foundation of the Christian faith? First, we need to distinguish between universal times, willingness times to die, and universal times martyrdom asterisk. The historical record is crystal clear that all the apostles were willing to suffer and die for their belief that Jesus Christ had risen from the dead. The book of Acts shows Peter and John being imprisoned and beaten, yet they refused to stop preaching. Paul's letters are a testament to relentless suffering. This willingness itself is historically significant. These were not men who made up a story and were trying to protect a lie. People will die for what they believe to be true, but they won't all willingly suffer brutal persecution for something they know is a fabrication. But being willing times to die is different from times dying a martyr's death. The evidence strongly supports that some did Peter, Paul, and the two Jameses. The evidence that all 12 times died as martyrs is much, much weaker. It's a claim that rests on late, unreliable traditions, not on solid history. So why did all these legends emerge? There are a few key reasons. First, martyrdom was seen as the ultimate mark of spiritual authority. A story about an apostle dying a heroic death was more powerful and inspiring than a story about him dying of old age. Second, as Christianity spread, different regions wanted to claim a direct connection to an apostle. What better way to do that than to say an apostle founded your church and was martyred in your city? It created a prestigious origin story. And finally, by the time we get to the Middle Ages, writers like the author of Times, the Golden Legend Times, or even later, John Foxe with his Times, Book of Martyrs, asterisk, were compiling stories. They weren't working with the critical historical tools we have today. They accepted most traditions as being equally reliable, blending history and legend together into the powerful stories we've inherited. They weren't trying to deceive anyone. They were simply working within a different framework of truth. It's also essential to remember that persecution in the early church was very real. The executions under Emperor Nero in Rome are confirmed by non-Christian historians like Tacitus. The stoning of Stephen and the execution of James by Herod Agrippa are recorded in Acts and fit what we know about the period. The question isn't whether early Christians were persecuted, they absolutely were. The question is, which specific apostles can we reliably say died in those persecutions? So, after all our investigation, what can we say we really know? Let's summarize our findings based on our three-tier evidence system. First, the historically secure facts. These are the claims backed by Tier 1 and solid Tier 2, evidence early, multiple, and sometimes even non-Christian sources. 1. Asterisk, Peter died as a martyr. Asterisk. This is predicted in the Gospel of John and confirmed by a chorus of the earliest church fathers. 2. Asterisk. Paul was executed for his faith. Asterisk. His own letters testify to his suffering, and early tradition is unanimous about his death in Rome. 3. Asterisk. James, son of Zebedee, was killed by Herod Agrippa. Asterisk. This is stated directly in the book of Acts. 4. Asterisk. James, the brother of Jesus, was executed by stoning. Asterisk. This is the crown jewel of our evidence, confirmed by the non-Christian historian Josephus. 5. And perhaps most importantly, asterisk. All the apostles were willing to face persecution and death rather than recant their belief in the resurrected Christ. Asterisk. This is demonstrated again and again in our earliest sources. Next, we have what is probable but less certain. For apostles like Andrew and Philip, Early but not unanimous traditions suggest they were martyred. The stories exist in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, but they lack the strong, independent corroboration we see for Peter or Paul. We can say the early church times believed times they were martyred, which is significant, but the historical proof is not as firm. Finally, we have what is primarily legendary tradition. For apostles like Thomas in India, Bartholomew, James the Less, Simon, Thaddeus, and Matthias, the specific stories of their deaths come from Tier 3 sources, late, often contradictory, and legendary accounts written centuries after their lives. We know they were historical men who followed Jesus, but the dramatic stories of their fates are almost certainly the product of later tradition, filling in the historical silence. So, where does this leave us? Does stripping away the legends diminish these figures? Absolutely not. In fact, it might do the opposite. It forces us to focus on the historically undeniable core of their story. A group of ordinary men who were so profoundly changed by what they witnessed that they willingly gave up everything, their homes, their safety, their very lives, to spread that message to the world. The real power isn't in the gory, legendary details of their deaths. The power lies in the unwavering conviction of their lives. That conviction, rooted in their encounter with the resurrected Jesus, is the historical bedrock upon which the entire Christian faith was built. And that is a story more powerful and more compelling than any legend. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the real fate of the apostles. If you're interested in exploring the historical sources we talked about today, I've included links and a reading list in the description below. This is a fascinating subject, and I encourage you to continue learning.